Alabama and everyone else. Mark Rogers TV talking some SEC football with Peter Burns from the SEC Network. Peter, we thank you for stopping by. It's always a good discussion.
You got it, man. I'm looking forward to it, and I apologize in advance. My dogs are here in my office, so if Saban and Peyton get too loud, you'll have to tell me to, and I'll have to kick them out.
Saban and Peyton.
Yep, you can tell I'm an SEC guy, right? I mean, that's the name of my two dogs. So
I should have expected no less. All right. Well, it's pretty much Alabama, Saban, Peyton. Well, he's got his 2 Super Bowl rings, but could never win the SEC. Well, he finally did. He got past Florida kind of late in his career there. So looking at 2016, though, it's kind of a knock on the SEC right now. And I still think it's the best conference top to bottom. Maybe not the top 4. There's a discussion there, but top to bottom, still the best. But Alabama's just so much better than everybody else right now that it almost takes, if it's possible, some attention off the SEC nationally, and especially as the college football playoff discussion becomes the forefront of the national narrative, the SEC really doesn't buy into the conversation.
Yeah, it was funny. I was at the gym today, and I looked up at one of the TV screens, and I saw, I can't remember if it was Highly Questionable or one of the other shows that had said, has the Big Ten surpassed the SEC? And I kind of laughed because I'm like, normally in years past, we would have kind of joked it around and thought that was kind of funny. But, I mean, if you look at least with Ohio State and Michigan and even with Penn State and Wisconsin, I mean, you're talking 4 good quality teams, too, that I think are outstanding between Michigan and Ohio State. Now, I'm not sure if we can talk about 4 outstanding teams that we have in the SEC. I think we have the most dominant one. I think we have by far the best one in Alabama. But outside of that, I mean, if you could go ahead and erase the first 2 losses for LSU, and maybe Ed Orgeron been the starting, had the mentality of that team started a little bit differently, yeah, I'd say that's as good of a team as probably anybody else in the country right now with the way that they're playing. But other than that, Georgia's had issues. Florida's had issues. Of course, we know what happened with Ole Miss and even Mississippi State. It's just been a weird year all around for the SEC. And a lot of that comes, Mark, you and I have talked about it, is the lack of quarterback play here in this very conference.
Peter, nobody can tell me that LSU is not one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the country. So regardless of the losses, maybe they even tack off another loss because they got A&M coming down the pike. But based on playing Alabama to a stalemate until like 12 minutes left in the game, that team is extremely good. And for them to drop in the college football rankings at the time, they were like number 13 and they dropped to like number 24 after losing to Alabama 10-0 in a game that was 0-0. That was crazy to me.
Well, and that's the hard part for the committee, right? I mean, the committee it's a delicate balance of who deserves to be there versus who are the best teams. Because right now you could say that if you're looking at the top, let's say 6 best teams, I'm not sure if LSU and USC wouldn't be in those discussions with the way that the Trojans are playing, especially with the way LSU's playing. And I'm sure we'll talk about a little Florida LSU coming up. But yeah, I mean, that to me is the biggest, the hard issue for the committee is where do you have guys ranked versus who deserves to be there versus, hey, if I want the best, 4 teams to play in it, that may be a completely different discussion. And unfortunately, you have to be fair, and you can't say that a 3-loss team deserves to be in the top 4 at, even almost a 2-loss team at this point.
Peter, the SEC's been so good that a lot of people have compared it to the NFL for a number of reasons. I'm going to make another comparison to the NFL, and that's that it's so popular that it's almost foolproof, meaning that there can be scandals, there can be player suspensions, there can be anything, and the NFL just keeps drawing in ratings. And the SEC would be in the same vein when it comes to what's happened to the league in regards to competitive balance. So it's been taken off the radar in regards to national, I don't want to say national interest because the game's still right through the roof, but in terms of the talk and the narrative. And do you think that kind of hurts the conference, even though it's as popular as ever? The SEC championship game, again, most likely this year, is going to be a bygone conclusion.
It's tough. I mean, I know that they would like to have some competitive balance, but I think that, when you go ahead and take a look, this is different than like the NBA, where the Western Conference was so dominant over the Eastern for so many years. I think what happened because there truly was talent differential. The West teams would just obliterate the East. I think for the East this year, you look at Georgia breaking in a new quarterback and of course a new coach. I think Florida, would have been solid, and Tennessee had they not had to deal with the litany of injuries that they had. And I so almost think that is a certain situation that if you had Alabama and LSU dealing with the injuries that Tennessee and Florida had to deal with this year, I think every team would struggle to that point. I mean, I looked at the Florida roster, and I mean, their injury report's almost as long as their starting lineup right now. And the same thing with Tennessee. Tennessee's lost almost 20 players to injury this year. So I don't think it's going to hurt the league, because I think true smart college football fans will take a look at it and go, yeah, it's a throwaway joke about how bad the East is compared to the West. I think they're 22-3. The West is compared to the East over the last 2 years, which is incredible. But I think a lot of it had to do with the injuries from this season. So, but I also look at it, you've talked about it, this on the quarterback play. I mean, quarterback play has just been something that's really been painful here in the SEC the last couple of years. But with Jake Bentley at South Carolina, I think he was very solid. I know a lot of people like Quentin Dormady at Tennessee to see if he can possibly do something. We've just seen some other, Jalen Hurts, of course, as a freshman who's been incredible. There's a lot of bright spots, I think. Jacob Eason, as these guys develop, I think there's a lot more young, good quality talent coming into the quarterback position, because we could probably go back and look at 2013, Mark, and there were good quarterbacks in this conference. I mean, you go back even before that, maybe Matt Stafford and Aaron Murray and those guys. We've had some quality quarterbacks in this league. It seems like we've been in the doldrums this last, probably 24 months.
Yeah, it was that Murray, McCarron, Manziel's Mettenberger class that really capped it off, and we haven't seen any level of play like that since. So you mentioned LSU in Florida, and you mentioned the dominance of the West over the East at 22-3 over the last, 2.5 years. But this is one that the East really needs if you're talking about Florida, because they're trying to hold off Tennessee and not lose a tiebreaker. So Florida's sitting at 5-2. They appear to be in good shape because Tennessee's 3-3. But if you shake out the tiebreakers, Tennessee really controls this if Florida slips up against LSU. And for my money, unless Florida comes out with an offense that we haven't seen this year, I think LSU's a decided favorite.
Well, I mean, kind of how we saw. I mean, you could almost say exactly what you just said. Unless Florida comes out with an offense we haven't seen, LSU's a deciding favorite. That's the same exact thing we could have said about LSU and Alabama this season, right? You're like, unless LSU comes out with this crazy offense we haven't seen, Alabama should win that game. And I think much like what we saw in Baton Rouge a couple of weeks ago, I think that's probably what we're going to see in Baton Rouge at noon on this upcoming Saturday. I think it'll be a low-scoring affair. I think Florida's defense still is very good as far as cornerbacks can play press coverage, up against Danny Etling. I think LSU just has the will to run the ball, and I'm just not sure if Florida has, frankly, enough healthy guys. I mean, Mark, you and I might be on the depth chart for the Florida Gators right now trying to stop the run. They're so banged up. And that would not be good for either one of us or Florida.
No, that would be very painful for both of us, I think. So for some reason, it's Mizzou and it's Tennessee on CBS, and you guys are in great shape on Saturday with a really good, important game with LSU taking on Florida in Baton Rouge. Of course, the makeup date with the SEC, inexplicably, nobody can explain this to me, kind of taking the week off prior to the big rivalry games the last weekend of the season, but because of the weather, of course, this really makes up for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd much rather see this game now than Florida playing Presbyterian and LSU playing South Alabama. I mean, that's the case. But what's interesting about this one is so many people, a lot of LSU fans, thought that Florida was ducking them earlier in the year. Remember, because Luke Del Rio wasn't back and they were banged up. It's ironic that Florida might be even worse off now than they were back when they were going to play LSU. I mean, LSU is still trying to figure themselves out. Now I think that they've got it rolling, and Florida's just dealt with more and more injuries. Now Austin Appleby's back. So although Appleby, did look solid, he did some things last week. He looked a lot more comfortable in that position. I just don't think Dave Aranda's done such a good job, Mark, with that defense at LSU. I think that's probably the least talked about thing in college football this season is how good of a job Aranda's done coming from Wisconsin to hang with that LSU defense has been fantastic.
Peter Burns from the SEC Network. After talking SEC football all day, Peter, we appreciate that you're not still sick and tired enough to sit down with us and talk some more.
Hey man, whatever you do, I'm all. This is always, worst case scenario. We have to talk about college football. There's a lot worse things in life to do,
There's no doubt about that.
What do you have this weekend? You got Florida. You got LSU.
Oh, you're going to make me pick. So I cut a video later in the week where I actually make the selection. So off the record, I don't know what the spread is on this game. Baton Rouge, I'm going to guess it's a full touchdown for LSU, but just picking it straight up, I don't see Florida winning this game in any way, shape, or form. I just think LSU is too good. I saw that Florida game at Arkansas. I think this thing's similar, and LSU is even better.
Well, like I said, you couldn't have had to say it's the same exact thing. I mean, like I said, it's I just think LSU has the will to run the ball right now, and I'd be surprised if Danny Etling throws more than 15 passes in that game. If he does, I don't know. All it'll be was kind of like Brandon Allen last year, where it's a lot of play action passes. Try to throw deep just to buy a little bit more space for the running back. So I see it being like 20-7 or 20-10 LSU.
That sounds about right. That Florida defense can only do so much, and Leonard Fournette is the best in the business, so he's probably going to wear them down at some point.
Yeah.
All right, Peter Burns from the SEC Network. Peter, we appreciate it every time, man. We know you don't need to do this, but you stop by and talk some SEC football with us.
Anytime, Mark. You let me know, and have a good weekend, all right?